Right, so first bit about this JS2. Well, I think we'll begin with the first challenge. As I said, this model was sent to me a good number of years ago now by another modelling friend in Canada, and this part, one of the hubs for the drive wheels was missing. Now I had two options here. I could have tried to fabricate this from plastic card in layers, which I think I should have done, but instead I went for I took some milliput, molded it around a bit of sprue. I then, once it's set, I clamped the sprue in an electric drill and then progressively sanded it down. So I used the drill fundamentally as a little handheld lathe. Thankfully, this is a well obscured component, because once you've got the sprocket on, the hull, the mud flap, the tracks, and pretty much everything else with this, it becomes pretty difficult to see too much of this. You can see here that the detail is largely obscured, and particularly when you then paint this grey, then green, and then probably have a Russian soldier trying to take cover somewhere around there, you will obscure even more of it. So replicating or replacing this part with something that does a similar job was the first challenge. Suspension seems to have gone on okay. Nothing too difficult there. I noticed that the fit of the upper hull to the lower hull is a bit of a mess, and there's whopping great gaps. So I put in some plastic card strips just to hide that gapping a little bit, and make the tank a little bit less, well, see-through. Now this is not something, as I said, I'm not a 1/35 scale armour builder. I've seen people mention this in other builds. I don't know how prevalent it is, but I know if I saw anything similar on an aircraft, it would bug the hell out of me. So I'm learning how to cover up these sorts of gaps. It just seems to me to be a fairly basic error that if you know it's there, it's going to bug the hell out of you. Well, certainly would do me. So I've taken some steps to make the lower hull of the tank look a little bit less, well, visible, shall we say, and I'll probably put another strip in there as well. So that's where we're starting off. First Dragon kit, and it's funny, it's one of these makes that you think is supposed to be really brilliant, and when you get to making one, you're thinking, oh, it's not quite as cool as I thought it would be. But nonetheless, it's a free tank, it's a decent size model of an interesting vehicle. So definitely some lessons to be learned. I think the next stage is going to be start hitting with the first bit of painting. I'm going to have to prep the wheels up as well. Get ready to hit them with something. So they'll be assembled next. Check my colour guides, make sure I've got the right shade. Get all of this properly painted up, and maybe put a little bit more to close up that gap, and then work out. There's going to be a lot of test fits to get this hull assembly right. So I get the impression that the way to build this is to get the lower hull and track done first, which seems fair enough to me. and then do the so this painted, wheels on done, and this done as a sub-assembly, fully as a sub-assembly with a lot of painting. Then paint this area, and then look at bringing it together before you start work on this. The reason I want to do it in that sequence is I can see that if I'm struggling with the basic hull fit and I've got a lot of gribblies and pokey out bits on this, and I'm trying to get this to fit properly, I could see myself knocking those off and things like that. So I'm going to want to get my lower hull done fully with wheels and track before I do get to this phase. An attempt to bring this together to a level that seems vaguely right. Not sure how that's going to work out, but we'll give it a go. So this is where we are at. This part, that's going to need thinning out a little bit for the fit as well. Maybe actually lose this and put it on with its associate once I've got this rear hull together, and I think that is the easiest way to do this. Yes, that was actually hindering the process somewhat. And then put on these rear flaps afterwards. Then I suppose with that off now I could actually do a bit more. But anyway, so this is where we are. Just started out. As I say, been a very long time since I've built a 1/35th scale tank. I think we are talking well over 30 years. Built plenty of 1/72nd scale ones, particularly when I was doing 20mm war gaming, but 1/35th scale, that's another matter. So that's the opening shots on this. So a bit of an update on where we're up to. I got the base coated black, then some Tamiya XF-5, which, having gone online, seems to be a recommended colour, but certainly does need to go down on a black base. Wheels assembled, painted same way, then bolt gun metal on the rims, because these are plain metal wheels. You can see the two rear hubs here. Slight difference between the two, but nothing too dramatic. Hopefully they are reasonably well aligned. I mixed some sawdust with PVA, brown, Revell brown paint and water to make like a thin wash, with which when it dries up the little clumps of sawdust hopefully look like clumps of mud, which I've applied. And because it's quite thin, it's the reveal, keeping, you can still see the base background colour, but it just sort of grubbies it up. So I've done that on the sides, and I filled in this space with plastic card, put a second layer of plastic card to fill it properly, and then applied the muddy weathering mix, or the thin mud weathering mix, to the underside as well. So you've got mud that's thrown up off the tracks against that inside face. So the tracks, this is where it might get a bit entertaining. So I've assembled them. They are currently held with a long strip of masking tape each. So that was airbrushed black, then airbrushed sand yellow, and then airbrushed over that a Seraphim Sepia wash, which has given me, I'm quite happy with this tone. The yellow, the sand yellow over black worked quite well, and then the Seraphim Sepia just gave a bit of variation. So they are, as you can see, held down with a bit of masking tape. Now what I'm going to do is put these tracks on and then secure them by brushing on a liquid weld adhesive along the edges, lift off, let that set, lift off the tape, brush more on, and then airbrush the tracks black, and then build it up from there using the same method, masking off the other areas. And that's going to be my approach with that. So I'm reasonably happy with the way this looks. I want to make sure I get the tracks pointing in the right direction, and so that's where we'll go from there. So reasonably happy with it so far. Once the tracks are on, I'll bring the I'll get the top hull located. I'll do a bit more work on the top hull, leaving off any fragile bits before I then attach it. So that's where we are. Okay, so progress with the KV2. Now I must admit, this is certainly proving an interesting project, and I think maybe because there is so much less filling and sanding than I'm used to, that it's moving at a faster rate than I normally would. Also maybe because it's just a different subject. So here we are with the hull. Tracks pretty much done, weathered. Attach the upper hull. I'm going to mask off the track area, and then get the upper hull, crack on with the upper hull painting first, undercoating with black, and then building up from there, and then doing various forms of shading. Took off one of the fenders on the front. We'll just approach the other bits as we get to them. Having fun with it. I'll have a couple of the external fuel tanks on one side, and then a couple of unditching logs on the other, in that sort of arrangement. Seems to have been carrying logs like that on this thing. This seems to have been a fairly common practice. I must admit, from an assembly point of view, as an aircraft modeler, this seems pretty easy. Oh, the tracks were a bit of a shock to the system, but fair enough. I think they, you know, if you really haven't done 1/35 scale tracks before, certainly not the Link type, the Magic Tracks type, then yeah, I'm not really entirely surprised, but here we are. I just realised that side is maybe a little bit wonky, but I'm not sure how noticeable that will be. Made my own mud solution. That seems to be going on and doing its job. Some fit issues around the more pointy thingy around the back here. So had these fenders off, then I've just now attached them with super glue. They were stopping the hull, the upper hull and the lower hull, from going together in their original attached format. So assembly. Again, what I would describe as no significant causes for concern with this. So like the texturing on it. Not really sure with this thing sometimes what is a seam that's meant to be there and what's a seam that isn't meant to be there, because it's either welded or with fairly brutal seams and joints. Building it buttoned up, could unbutton it if I wanted if I decided to get a Soviet tank crewman peering from the commander's hatch. So that's where we are. The barrel, I put a whole load of Mr. Surfacer on the upper surface seam, and then when that's set fully, so leave that overnight, then I will hit that with some I'll get that sanded down, then attached. I think my intention for this diorama is to have it displayed something like that, with the M3 parked up behind. So the logs have to sort of be just over the width. Now, it may even come down that I remove the brackets from that side and just have the logs sat on the fender. I have to admit, at this stage, I rather got lost in the process. Tracks were done, lower hull was done, and I kind of threw myself into the painting and weathering side. Principally the painting, starting off with a black base and then building up from there. Bit more work on getting the hull halves together and blanking things off. That included having to put in a bit of filler, and then it was just running with it, going with the flow, what felt right, what looked right. Made up some tow cables. First attempt with it, wasn't too happy, then took a different approach, and I just enjoyed the process. I didn't videotape it because I got lost in it. That's all I can say. So the next part is, you can see in this pic here, that's the basic green coat down, and then it was just a case of a lot of reworking of this, just getting the shade to the level that I wanted it, and the weathering to the level that I felt looked right for the setting that I've got in mind. Made it closed up. I only used, rather than doing 222 decals, I just did 22 for the decals, and then blended them in with the weathering powders. Added an aerial from a pin. The other stuff, as I say, from a modelling point of view, from a practical point of view, it was relatively easy. I found it quite relaxing, quite soothing, without the same, just different from my normal aircraft subjects, in that there you tend to be so worried about maintaining a good quality finish, and I did feel that armour modelling was a bit more relaxed on that front. You could rework things, you could hide things with a bit of mud, you had much more leeway with weathering. Well, that's what my feeling was anyway, and I certainly don't mean to deprecate any regular armour modelers, because I can certainly appreciate the skill in what they do, especially in getting the decent finishes, the camouflage schemes, and the ability to do the final fine detail, especially in 1/35th, which opens up so many more doors for very fine detail work. So next bit will be just a review, and then the final picks. So I realise I haven't been making enough videos for this build series, so here is the JS2 completed basically. My last stage, the last video you saw it with the painting, and I must admit it moved fairly quickly from there. That I got the basic XF-5 on, and then just layered up from there. Now that was, the XF-5 was put on a black background, which worked quite well. It gave it just the right tone. Then it was a case of tone balancing and adjustment with various shades, and then I made very heavy use of, well, after I hit it with the XF-5, I hit it with brown wash and with the good old GW Seraphim Sepia, and then used lighter tones with both airbrush, weathering powders to take them up. I used my own mud mix, which is, as I discussed earlier, is sawdust, brown and PVA glue, which seems to work quite well. That's been applied around the hull in various areas. We can see here on the forward mounted trunk legs on the tracks. From my reference photos, I saw that quite a number of JS2s did carry ditching logs or unditching logs, so that's what those are. I just happened to find them in a box of bits I had that would. Made some straps from masking tape, then again a brown wash, and then weathering powders, bearing in mind that the exhausts are there and there, so you're going to have the exhaust stains going over the hull and over the logs, hence the darker tones, and a little bit of rusting on the hot exhaust. I felt that would be more likely to oxidize. An oil wash used all various places over these grills, highlighting along the edges. With the decals I used a green weathering powder just to fade in the decals. It was 222, but I just felt 22 looked better. The tow cables, now the kit doesn't come with any. I made them by taking copper wire, which I just twisted back upon itself, created the aglets using masking tape that was then covered in super glue, allowed to set, and then painted in a metallic cover. Then the copper wire was painted black, and then various metallic tones and washes applied to it. There is a second cable there. I think this second one probably looks too light, and I should have made something a bit chunkier. So the first one, the more visible one, I think is a better looking tow cable. Probably need to put some kind of strap there. Aerials, now by the later stages of the war, more Russian vehicles did have the radios, but they were still in short supply, but there was the fitting for the aerials, and I did find images of JS2s with the whip aerials on there. So I just took a pin and took the head off, bent it a bit, and have put in an aerial. People can dispute whether it did have, but it did have the location for the aerial, for the radio. How good it was is another matter. Again, looking at reference photos, they didn't appear to be that massively cluttered up, not like US vehicles. And I suppose if you've got the air intakes, you're not going to put canvas over that. The rear hull is going to be fairly well worn with tank riders and all the rest of it. but a lot of the images I found for JS2s tend not to be excessively cluttered over. Maybe this is a bit light. This is it just didn't seem to be much on them, and certainly I didn't find any images of bags hanging off the sides of them. They just didn't seem as cluttered up as many US and UK vehicles. That's the perception I've had from the pics. Maybe could have been a bit more on the rear deck there, maybe. So this is really much part one of this, and this is going to now form part of a diorama with a Lend-Lease M3. So this video will go up as a separate vid altogether. So for now, that's the JS2